Wylus filled the doorway to the mews with his shoulders, and a light came off the snow as if it had been hammered into brightness on anvils. The little lord had climbed again. Wylus could see him on the broken crenel by the first keep, freckles lit like coal sparks where the sun touched his cheek. He had a voice, and used it, and Winterfell had long learned its gentleness. "Bran!" he called, cupping an immense hand to his mouth. "Your lady mother will have my hide for a horse blanket." A laughter answered him from somewhere nearer the ice-paned well. Arya, small as a dart and twice as quick. Wylus stepped into the yard. The wind found his curls and set them to dancing. His hair refused any discipline, just as he did not force it. The old mare in the stall behind him stamped and blew a breath smoke that smelled of hay. Bran turned, the world rocking calmly in his look, and waved. "One more tower, one more broken neck," Wylus said, and tried to lace it with humor instead of fear. He crossed under the shadow of the first keep. The scarred stones drank light. Snow hung off the merlins in fraying sleeves. "If you fall again, I'm the one who will be made to lift you. And you'll do it," Bran said, grinning. "And teach you to curse," Wylus finished, because he'd learned to end a boy's teasing with a jest and not an order. Boys bent before they obeyed. Men broke. It was old Nan's doing that he spoke that way. She told him once that words were like good bread. You could feed a house with them if you were careful and patient. He was patient and careful unless there were animals to be moved or doors to be carried or barrels to be rolled. What he had in muscle he spent like coin, plain and happy. What he had in voice he kept like salt for winter. No one in Winterfell feared his tongue. Some had even begun to call him Hodor as a jape. Farlan first, when they moved the new oak slabs to the great hall and Wylus bore one on a shoulder. "Hold the door, hold the door!" The kennel master had cried, and the words stuck to his back until they turned friendly. He did not mind. Names clung to big men. He let them. He reached the foot of the broken tower, looked up, and saw the quick heel of a stranger vanish around a parapet. He blinked at that. A green cloak had flashed, new-made, the kind a handmaid would finger. The air shifted. "The world knows when it is being watched," old Nan would say, and Wylus felt it now. An attention thin as wire pulled taut. He raised his voice again. "Bran, come down." "From where?" came Arya's voice. She had that edge of mockery that meant she liked you. "From mischief." Her face appeared from behind a broken buttress, hair untamed, eyes bright as a new penny. "Mother says if no one tried mischief, nothing would ever get done." "That sounds like a thing you invented," Wylus said. "It sounds like old Nan," Arya said softer, because Nan was an authority that even wild hearts bowed to. The green cloak flashed again, and this time Wylus saw that it cloaked a woman. A lady, long pale hair knotted like a fair rope, her companion dark and quick with a lion's grace. He did not know faces the way courtiers did. To Wylus, horses made more honest company. But he knew arrogance in the set of shoulders. He could have bellowed. He could have raised guards. Instead, he took a step toward the tower and felt the way his feet placed themselves heavy and ready, the way a draft horse braces against a load. The wind snatched voices above. A cry, brief, startled. A word that had no words inside it. And then the sound of breath leaving a body very hard and very fast. The world drew small as a bridle loop. Wylus ran. They ran too late. He knew by the shape of the silence they ran too late. The boy fell cruelly slow, as if the air had thickened to syrup. Wylus slammed himself against the earth to catch him and felt the impact as a second, smaller winter. Pain flew through his arms, and then Bran lay in his lap like a fresh-cut branch whose sap did not flow. "I've got you," Wylus said, though the boy couldn't hear. "I've got you." Farlan and the yard men came like crows, cackling their shock. Wylus carried the boy like he had once carried sacks of grain. He could not think to do anything else, and the heat from the glass garden steamed up around them as he crossed toward the maester's tower. He set Bran down upon linen as if it were a weirwood root. He could do nothing else with the hands he had, which were meant for lifting, not for fixing. He stood aside and watched Maester Finger's work while the boy's chest rose and fell as if it had forgotten the rhythm and was reaching after it. Catelyn Stark had night in her hair and ice in her eyes when she came, and Wylis found his mouth empty of anything useful. She took his hand like a hawk takes a perch, firm and smelling of storm. "You caught him," she said, because there were too many other things she could have said and far, far fewer that would help. "You caught him, Wylis." "I tried," he said, and for the first time since he was 10 and a bullock broke his collarbone, he wanted to weep. He didn't. Nan had said tears were a kind of truth, but there were truths you gave privacy to. He stood and stood, and he was still standing when night came with its 100 cold fingers. Bran lived, and the living drew Wylis into a new shape. He slept on the rushes by the boy's door and learned the sound of the shallow breaths that signaled pain, the stir that meant thirst. The direwolf pup found the same duty and shared the watches with him, much as far better men shared sword watches on walls. The pup had gold eyes that caught firelight. He was the quietest of his litter. Wylis named him nothing. Naming was work for Starks. But in his head he called the beast the thing he was. Summer, because when the wolf lay on the blankets with his muzzle over Bran's good hand, the room gained a small warmth that felt earned. When the boy woke, Wylis was holden. A wooden cup to his lips and saying in his slow old way, "Drink. I know it tastes like boiled bark. Drink." Bran drank and looked at him over the rim. Words were half ice in the boy's mouth. "Will I walk?" "I don't know," Wylis said. He could have lied, the good lie that hopes to become true by being said. He had never liked that sort of conjuring. "But I will carry you. Sometimes it looks like walking if we are both clever." Bran watched him with a steadiness older than his years. "You're kind." "I am stubborn," Wylis said. "Kindness is a story told about stubborn people after they are dead." Bran smiled, the first small crack in the frost. "Old Nan put that in your mouth." "She put most of the important things there," Wylis answered. "I only make the bread." So he learned to carry. He learned the turns of the corridors where the stones dipped, the ways the steam warmed his back when he passed the hot water channels, how to move so that Bran did not bang shoulder or shin. He whittled stops for chair legs. He altered harnesses. He bullied older boys eager to help into wearing off their impatience against the grindstone of someone else's need. He found that he could lift the boy without losing his gentleness, and there was a pride in that, though he did not name it aloud. Names were like prayers. You saved them. The house changed as houses do when a sickness fills them. Footfalls lightened. Voices softened. Eddard Stark went south with the girls and heavy weather in his face, and Robb Stark learned the rule of a keep that had been built to bear the weight of centuries. Catelyn Stark went after her husband, and the stiffness in her shoulders when she told Wylis to care for Bran had a kind of gratitude in it that made his throat thick. Robb, red hair like a banner in the yard wind, thrust a training sword into the air too often as if victory could be speared like a game bird. Every household has its plays when the fathers leave. Then a gray tide came in from the Iron Islands in the shape of Theon Greyjoy, and the tide ate. Wylis knew tides. He had watched them take buckets and children in a wet season when he was small. This one wore a smile. It took Roderick Castle's old mustaches and the old man's older neck. It took pride and gave back ashes of pride. When the gates fell to betrayal, Wylis had Bran in his arms and Rickon slamming a small fist against his shoulder as if fury could age him into usefulness. "Where are we going?" asked Osha, wildling and truer than many of Winterfell's old men and women. "Down," Wylis said. "Then north." "Down to go north," Osha said with a noise that was almost a laugh. "Aye, that is a good Winterfell answer." She had her spear and her hair tied back in a rope and moved with the grace of a fox across crusted snow. Mira and Jojen Reed came in time like marsh from nowhere, eyes the color of leaf shadow and lake water, like the gods had carved them out of green. Wylis did not know their house, but Jojen's gaze had the sort of knowledge in it that made old men either nod or spit. Nan had told tales of crannogmen who could slip through reeds without leaving a ripple. "That one has dreaming on him," Osha said to Wylis, nodding at Jojen. "And dreaming's a cold ration. You eat too much, your belly knots. Jojen's smile found them in the dark. We would not be here if not for my dreams. We would not be here if not for Greyjoy's hate, Osha said. Do your dreams say anything about doors? About many, Jojen said. They went down into the crypts through a door that no one remembers until they need it. The air thick with the smell of earth and wet stone, and Wylis felt the pressure of the dead like snow packed on a roof. He had respect. He did not let it take him. He carried Bran past the kings whose wolves had turned to rock, and if fear tightened something under his ribs, he did not share it with the boy whose paleness had become a kind of light in the dark. They waited and they listened to the Ironborn rage above, and to the soft voice Jojen used when he spoke of paths that were not streets and maps that were not parchment. When the black passed, it did so like a night that has exhausted itself, and they slipped out under the sky with its pinprick sword points. It was a cold new life. Wylis had thought Winterfell was the north. He learned different, one frost at a time. The hills came blunt and close. The woods sounded different. Less like wind in bellows, more like breath stopped in a throat. He wore the boy's weight and the boy wore his weight, and together they built a pace that a man could defend. Behind, Osha beside Rickon made of herself a line you did not cross. And ahead, the reeds drifted from shadow to shadow like a pair of thoughts you could not quite catch. The wolves grew and grew, and sometimes, when Bran fell asleep against Wylis's shoulder with his hand tangled in summer's fur, Wylis felt something brush his own mind. Not a touch, but the space where a touch could be. Do you feel it? Bran asked one night, drowsy with pain and stew. Feel what? The trees. I feel the wind, Wylis said after a time. I feel you. Maybe the wind comes through you and I call it trees. Bran looked up as if the spaces between branches were roads. Jojen says there's a river under the ground and the trees drink it and remember everything that ever fell into it. He says there are men who can drink it too with their minds. Nan spoke that story, Wylis said carefully. Words could push a boy into a place where men could not follow. She said those men did not always come back thirsty. I think I'll be careful, Bran said like a promise. Don't think, Wylis said softly. Just be. They crossed old stones rimed with hoarfrost, found whole towers where owls nested, ate roots Osha browned with rendered fat until they tasted like the memory of feasts. Sleep became a kind of barter. Wylis bartered his own away readily. He had a back like a sled, meant for carrying. When Jojen's green dreams stuttered and burned him like fever, Wylis cooled the boy with snow and told him the sort of story that does not pretend to be more than a hand on the back of the neck. About a chestnut colt that would not allow the halter until Wylis learned to loosen his grip. About the time Farlan argued with a goose and lost. About the night the hot springs burst their limits and flooded half the kennels with steam you could eat. At the night fort, stone teeth bit the sky. The old castle squatted like a giant that had frozen in the act of standing. It smelled of bat and memory. Wylis did not love it. He loved the way it hid them, though, and the way Mira's laugh echoed in a way that made even laughter wary. It was there they found a black-clad man with a boy and a girl and a will like iron under his politeness. He had a book of faces in his stare and a promise of help. He called himself Sam, and Wylis watched the stiff way Sam held his courage as if he had taught himself to lift it, one moment at a time. They found a gate in the cold stone. No handle, no hinge, a seam so thin you might think the wall itself breathed, and Sam spoke to it as if speaking could coax stone to mercy. The dark opened, and Wylis took Bran's weight and carried it into the old ice that felt not frozen but carved. He thought of fish lying still under a river and of the mouths of wolves. He did not think of fear. Beyond the wall, the air attacked the lungs rather than filled them. The snow had a particular squeak that said it would not take impressions easily, and Wylis felt a childish pride at the tracks he and the wolves made, honest and heavy. Is this the end of the world? Rickon asked, and Osha cuffed him without malice. No, boop. Just a place where the world forgot its manners. The children of the forest were not children. They were old in the way an old tree is old, so old that age itself looked different on them than on men. Leaf smiled at Wylis like a cousin you'd never seen before who knew your family's smallest shame and loved it into a story. Inside the cave there was heat made of moss and fire and something else, and in that heat grew the man they called the Three-Eyed Raven, who had once been something else. A lord, a brother, a blade. Wylus did not know what to do with gods dressed as men or with men dressed in the memory of gods. He knew that Bran went away when he sat before the old man, and that sometimes Summer's ears tilted toward sounds that Wylus could not hear, and that when Bran came back there was a tiredness on him that sleep did not touch. "You are the river," Bran whispered once as Wylus lifted him toward the low pallet Leaf had made of woven boughs. "No," Wylus said, thinking of Nan's sayings. "You are the river. I'm the banks." He learned a piece of their speech the way a laborer learns a hymn, by repetition first, then by the way the syllables settle in the chest. He learned to set a stake and draw a circle in ash that whites could not cross easily. He learned to listen to the dark, not as an enemy but as a partner, as a craftsman listens to oak. Mira learned too, and there were nights when they sat with their backs to one another and spoke softly about jokes their brothers had told, about swans that landed on their marshhouse roof, about bread. People talked about bread when they wanted to talk about love without being caught at it. The army of the dead came like weather breaking. Jojen had dreamed it, and Leaf had named the sound the snow makes when it is carrying something heavier than itself. It began as a rigorous quiet that made Wylus think of the yard at the first hour of morning, the pause before Farland shouted and gates swung. Then it cracked in the trees like bones. They had made plans. When you live under stone with a boy who dreams himself into the roots of the world, you learn to make plans. Wylus led one of the hinges of those plans, which was to open a narrow passage toward a throat of rock and then to hold it long enough for a mind to do the work of 10,000 spearmen. The first of the dead were foxes, small, splay-footed, too many teeth. Leaf's fire broke them into ash that smelled like nothing Wylus had ever smelled. Then the men came, walking with the geometry of puppets, eyes made of absence. Wylus had found a chain somewhere in the cave, old iron with cooperation hammered into its links. He wrapped it around his forearm and across his chest and took hold. "Do not let them touch you," Leaf said, not unkindly. "That's a thing I could have learned later," Wylus answered, but he smiled. He had found that joking in the face of a thing that wanted your soul made the soul just stubborn enough to hang on a few beats more. Mira stood beside him, spear ready, breath balanced. Jojen's hands lay folded on his chest as if in prayer. His eyes were open and looking at something Wylus could not see. Bran sat in the chalk circle they had drawn and made himself still in a way Wylus had never been able to be still. Summer stood over the channel like a statue someone had gifted with fury. When the rush came, it was an answer to a question no one sane had asked. Wylus anchored the chain between two stones and leaned into it, his body the last simple thing in the world. The dead came against him with the patience of weather on rock. He let his weight be the argument. The chain bit frost into his ribs. Mira used the spear like a pen writing on ice. Leaf flung wild green fire the way a girl might throw snow. Wylus felt hands on him like cold smoke, and he shook them off the way a horse shakes off flies. He could hear Bran's breath, slow and so very far away, and under it a second sound, low, tremendous, the heart of the tree under the mountain. Summer snarled, teeth slashing absence, and the sound fed the part of Wylus that had never learned to fear his own size. "Back!" he bellowed when the line surged. The word came from somewhere. Deep, older than words, and Mira knew to bend and slip and give inches like a careful gambler. The children's fire painted Wylus's arms in green. The chain sang and then bit through something that did not bleed. After, Leaf would say that the song the iron made frightened the dead more than the flames, and Wylus would smile because he had learned a new way to be useful. They held long enough. It is always only long enough. Summer leapt and dragged down something bigger than any man Wylus had ever seen, and Leaf's knife flashed blue and white and then went dull. Wylus felt a cold like a juddering in the bones and understood that the cold had intention. "Run," Leaf said, and there was no fear in the word, only a choice presented and accepted. They ran. Summer ran at their shoulders and then away, drawing a storm behind him. Wylus grieved even before he knew what was being given up. A grief that lives in advance of the thing has a different flavor to it, saltier. They reached the back passage that Leif had whispered about on nights when even whispering hurt. Benjen Stark met them in the snow, face half a map of living flesh and half a covenant with winter, and hauled them through with a force that seemed born more of the world than of one man. "Uncle?" Bran breathed, and something in his shoulders broke and mended all in one motion. Benjen had words that Wireless could not, news from north and beyond north, a logic of blue shattering, the knowledge of a spear you must make from a tree that has never known a summer. He set them on a horse sledge and made the horse a promise that it balked at but kept. Wireless rediscovered what it was to be carried instead of to carry, and hated it reflexively, which made Benjen grin. Grins looked strange on faces that had been near death and not entirely parted from it. They made you want to smile back just to keep the man in the world. At the wall they found men who had thought they were ready, because a man must think that to get up in the morning when the morning is made of knives. Dolorous Ed opened a gate with a complaint and a blessing braided up together, and Wireless loved him for it. He loved men who complained honestly about work and then did it. Night after night, Bran sat before the fire and went places beyond the fire, into roots and ravens, into histories that wished not to be remembered and into one or two that did. His face had grown older without the meanness of years. He had gained the sort of authority that even hard men glance at twice before they refuse. Mira slept badly and woke with her spear near. Her hair learned to be practical about its knots. Jojen slept as one who had made a bargain and did not yet know the price. Wireless taught the watch how to shift heavy doors without breaking fingers. He did not find it strange to treat a gate as if it were a stubborn ox. Wood and wood, weight and weight, a hinge and a joint are cousins. Word reached them, word travels like smoke up and over walls, that the bastard boy of Winterfell was not so bastard as he had seemed, and that he had died and then breathed again, and that men liked him better the second time. Word said that Sansa Stark had returned to her own name and that she used it like armor. Word said that the flayed men had been driven from Winterfell and left their banners hanging crooked like dead trees. Wireless did not love banners. He loved the idea that a girl could steer a house. When they came south to Winterfell at last, it did not feel like returning to a place so much as returning to a song that had once been sung in that place. The broken keep still had its brokenness. The hot steam still wore the air like a shawl. The heart tree in the gods would took them in with the stare of a creature that has watched 1,000 men mistake themselves for giants. Sansa Stark walked the yard as if she had taught herself the stones like words and was reciting them under her breath. She looked at Wireless with a gratitude she did not apologize for. Arya returned later, carrying silence like a knife and a new kind of hunger in her face. She laughed in a way that the yard did not immediately understand. Jon, when he came, had scars that were not on his skin. He gripped Wireless's forearm as if Wireless were, of all the memories in his head, the one that would hold. Wireless found himself awkward and huge in the presence of people who had become to the world what old Nan's stories had been to him. A kind of instruction in how to survive the unbearable. "Will you stay?" Sansa asked. It was the first matter-of-fact thing anyone had said to him since the cave. "There are horses that need me," Wireless said, and then corrected himself, smiling. "And there are doors." She smiled back without quite meaning to. "There are." Winterfell's defenses changed. Where once there had been strength in the simple weight of stone and iron, now there needed to be shape and contingency and the sort of thinking that accepts failure as a shape to build around. Wireless laid his big hands on latches and hinges and felt what made them fail, the way a singer lays his ear to a lute. He set men who had never thought about weight to thinking about it. He taught them that a door is not only a thing that keeps an enemy out, but a thing that invites a friend in. He learned, from Leif's old lessons, where to draw ash lines and where to hang bells that knew the language of cold. He made a little brigade of villagers and boys and tailors and cooks whose only duty in the coming war would be to open and close things in the right order. Farlan came, rolling his eyes but staying until the end of the lesson, even when the lesson was about the dignity of a small task. "We will be mocked," one boy said. "We will be alive," Wireless said, and lifted the oak slab as if it weighed what it did and no more. Night came as it was bound to come. Prayers came too, which is all prayer is, something that comes when it must. When the dead at last flowed around Wint, Urfel's walls, they came like a corrected rumor, unadorned by anything so beautiful as fear. Wylus had placed men at the postern near the godswood, and at the ward stairs, and at the larder door that stuck when it was cold. He had a place of his own in the godswood, under the white bark where Bran sat like an answer to a riddle only the dead had asked. "Will you need me to carry you?" Wylus asked. Bran shook his head once. "Not my body." Wylus nodded, understanding only that there was a way to be carried that required no arms. He set the chain across his chest again, old iron warmed by his breath, and took his station at the narrow gate that let men pass from the hall to the sacred space. Mira stood with him, and she reached and touched the chain as if it were a friend's shoulder. "I dreamed there would be a door," she said. "There always is," Wylus said. "It's the oldest magic. You draw a line and say this side is different from that side, and the world agrees." They waited. Waiting is its own kind of labor, and Wylus did it as he had learned to do all work, with his whole body. The flames on the trench lines outside rose and guttered. Men screamed as men had always screamed when they realized they were both mortal and unwilling. The dead tested the wall, the air, themselves. Wylus felt not heroism but utility. He was a part of a mechanism, a weight to be balanced. It made the fear behave. The first shock came through the oak like teeth. The door had seen nights, had known storms. It knew its part. Wylus bent his shoulder in. He felt the body of the keep take the strain like a great animal. He looked up once and saw Bran's eyes not quite here, not quite there, and thought of riverbanks and how they hold water without forbidding it. They had made a wrong in their plans. There will always be one. A side passage, meant for cooks in kinder seasons, had been left unbarred in the hurry of certain men to take up swords. Wylus sent a boy to it with a wedge and a crowbar, and the boy's face was the color of parchment that has been held too near a fire. "Do you know what to do?" Wylus asked because he had promised himself not to assume. "Lift and lean," the boy whispered, and Wylus touched the back of his neck in blessing, as his mother would have done and could not do there and then, and the boy ran. The dead came in a press that did not feel like bodies. It felt like weather and hunger and arithmetic. Mira's spear rose and fell with the economy of someone counting seconds. Leaf's ash lines hissed where blue feet tried them. Wylus gave ground like a bargeman easing a boat off a sandbar. He thought of the first time he had lifted Bran, how he had believed his arms would tremble and had found they did not when the work was for someone else. In the roar of an army you can hear individual blunders. A man slipped. A shield struck stone instead of flesh. A torch went out. Wylus heard a girl's breath catch. He answered small disasters with small corrections. He breathed like the forge. He set his boot to a brace. He said to Mira, and only to her, "If I fall, you will not. This is not poetry. It's instruction." She did not say that she had crafted her whole life to disobey such instruction. She said, "I know the difference." And the relief that touched Wylus was almost as fierce as the grim love. The godswood took on a glow, not from any earthly fire. You could feel it in the hair on your arms. A wind moved through it that had no temperature. The dead shrank back as a bank of them caught. Something that is not bravery but is not bravery rippled through their ranks. Wylus knew the feel of a herd that had been checked, the way muscles remember an earlier set of rules. He redoubled his pressure. Lines held. The boy came back from the side passage with blood on his cheek. His wedge smoked with the cold of it. His eyes so wide they looked like winter stars. "I did it," he said, half shock, half delight, and Wylus felt a stitch in his throat and said the truth. "You did." When the thing that led the dead came toward the godswood, a silence so complete the air around it seemed deaf, Wylus did not look up. He had his door to think about, his hinge to tend, his friends to keep. He did not see the way the girl who'd once been Arya moved, because sometimes the world is kind enough to do the work out of your sight so that you may do yours. He only felt the dead lose interest, the way a storm sometimes simply moves its particular passion to the next ridge. The pressure on the door eased, then softened, then let go. He did not believe it at first. He held with the same weight for a full minute after, because habits are the only religion some men truly have. Then he stepped back, slowly, and the oak shuddered and remembered what it was to be a door in peacetime. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of breathing and weeping, and the sound of a wolf lying down and letting his head drop to the earth as if the earth had called him by a pet name. Bran opened his eyes. He looked at Wylus and saw him, not with whatever sight he had learned around the roots, but with the straightforward sight of a boy who had loved a big man for the good reasons boys love big men. "Thank you," he said. It was the first thanks Wylus had ever allowed himself to want. After, they buried dead and fed living and put out fires that smoldered in the cellars as if winter itself had indulged in one last sulk. Wylus had wrapped a shoulder in linen and vinegar and did not complain because he could lift again, and lifting was his way of proving he had survived. He taught the doorkeepers to take pride in their work without strutting. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder who had wedged the side passage and felt the thin bone there like the first green twig of spring. Once the weight of the days grew less murderous, Wylus took time to sit by the heart tree. He sat as men do when they have never learned to sit, with his legs unsure what to do with all that stillness. Bran came and sat with him. The boy had become a clear place in a fog, and Wylus found that standing near him made his own thoughts behave better. "I saw you," Bran said, and then, because that was not enough, "I see you, not only now. I hope you did not catch me stealing honey cakes," Wylus said, and Bran smiled. "I saw you catch me," Bran said quietly, "from a tower, and try not to be broken by breaking my fall. You did that twice." Wylus looked at his hands. They had scars like punctuation now where the chain had taught him a language. "You were lighter when you were younger, and heavier when I was learning to be something else," Bran said. He lifted a hand and rested it against the bark, as if checking a fever. "Do you remember when you said you were the banks and I was the river?" "Ido." "You were. Rivers flood, and banks hold," Wylus said. He let himself feel the truth of it. Sometimes they don't, and the floodplain learns the same story in another way. Bran's smile was a leaf turning. "Old Nan put you in my life for a reason." "She put me in my life for a reason," Wylus said. "Yours is what happened when the world got hungry for more reason than one boy could eat. There were other days. There are always other days, even when, yes, you die eventually." Mira left with the marsh light in her eyes and kisses like promises she refused to make. She looked back only once and then walked into her country as if she'd grown out of it. Jojen stood on the wall in the mornings sometimes and looked north with an expression you could not read without having died once. Sansa counted grain and men and learned the way numbers sometimes tell stories truer than men do. Arya cleaned a blade with a sort of care that looked like prayer. Jon went south on an errand for which no word existed that would not be a lie. Peace, perhaps. And came back with a look that men get when they have stood too near the eyes of dragons and not burned. The world kept on being itself, and that is a relief in the dull part of the soul that craves the ordinary. Wylus went to the mews in the mornings, not to climb but to watch birds as they argued their marriages with the air. He mended harnesses in the afternoons. His fingers were not nimble, but they were true. He ate in the kitchens with men whose names would never be in any story and loved them for it. Sometimes he told the younger boys about the way iron sings and why it mattered that you listen. Sometimes, when the gates swung, a cry went up on the walls, "Hold!" It was not a prayer, nor an order, nor a jest, but a habit. Men and women put their backs to doors and latches and gates and to one another, and they held. It became a sound that did not belong to Wylus and yet did. He let it pass through him as a river passes through the place where it has been a river so long it scarcely needs reminding. He dreamed, sometimes, dreams that smelled of moss and old fire. In them, old Nan sat by a hearth that had learned his name, telling stories that folded into other stories. In some of them, he could not speak, and he woke with a panic in his throat that ended as soon as he said any word at all, the first word that came, bread or horse or Bran. In those mornings, he would walk the corridors before dawn and put his palm to hinges. He had learned to hear the way wood answers the world. He had learned to be a bridge between weight and will. In a year that did not know yet what it was going to be, a woman from White Harbor came to Winterfell to trade salted cod for wax, and she told a tale about a giant down in the neck who carried an entire millstone on his back rather than let it crush the child under it. She said he could speak and that he taught the reedfolk jokes so old they were new again. Wyllis listened and smiled and said nothing. Stories travel on their own legs. He didn't need to own this one. He only needed to prove it true in his body the next time the world asked. Bran, grown into a boy whose hands had learned the exact weight of silence, came to him near dusk one day in the Godswood. The light lay flat on the snow, and the bark's red streaks looked almost black. "I saw a piece of you," he said, not quite a question. Wyllis rubbed a thumb over the grain of the bench. "Did you like him?" "I admired him," Bran said simply. "He died in another story to save me, and the word the world made of that dying rode on my back until I could hardly stand. In this story you did not die. It is a good story too." Wyllis breathed out, not knowing he had been holding the breath. Sometimes the hardest thing to explain to boys is that not only death is brave. Bran looked at him with that very old, very young gaze. "Stay near, Wyllis." "I will," Wyllis said, "because some oaths are only repeating what you have already done without knowing it had a name." He turned his great body toward the keep. The sky promised snow, and he knew which doors would swell in it. He knew where to put a shoulder and where simply to knock. He knew the names of men who stood their watches, and he had names ready for boys who had not yet found theirs. He passed under the lintel, and for a moment the hall's filtered light made a pattern across his face that looked like the shadows of leaves. He did not notice. He had work to do. He set his palms to the wood and felt how it answered, honest as a horse, old as any prayer, and then he moved it so others could pass. Spring did not arrive by decree. It crept in sideways. Snow retreated from the black earth in ragged scallops, and steam drifted from the bathhouse roofs like sighs too old to stop themselves. In the yards, the flagstones showed their scars, chips and seams that told the story of boots and hooves and a night when death had hammered at every hinge. Winterfell learned to walk differently across itself, as people do after an injury. Wyllis kept slow company with the new SE, Aeson. He rose before light to check wedges and braces, to run his palm down oaken planks that had held the world back and were now only doors again. The relief of it made him gentler, which was a thing he had not known could be true. You would think victory would make a man bolder. It made him careful as a mason setting the first stone in a rebuild. He had a brigade now, the little cadre none of them had known they needed until the Black Knight taught it. 12 of them when everyone remembered to come, 8 good regulars when hangovers and lovers did their work, tailor's sons and smith's daughters, a baker who could swing a mallet as if she were beating dough, a stable boy with quiet hands and a way with dogs. He had them count the pulse in their necks before they lifted anything, to know the pace of their own bodies the way you know the behavior of a door. He made them walk the keep's veins in pairs at dusk and again before dawn, showing them where frames warped if the wind went east 3 days in a row, where ice settled in seams like a thief patient enough to learn your schedule. He made them treat the larder door with more ceremony than the main gate, because famine could kill you with more stubbornness than any army if you were sloppy. Sansa liked to watch those lessons from the veranda above the kitchens, where the steam warmed her cheeks and loosened the tension that courtiers' talk knotted behind her eyes. She listened without hiding it. There was a respect in that made Wyllis's chest warm. She was not above labor, only barred from it by the shape of her new responsibilities. When she came down afterward to ask about some hinge or latch, she did not ask the sort of questions people ask to prove they have listened. She wanted to know what he'd seen, what he expected to go wrong. She had learned the terrible luxury of planning for disaster. "They laughed at me when I told the lords that we must count our iron and our rope," she said one morning as Wyllis set a new pin. Her smile was light only on the surface. "They would not laugh at you. That is because I am big and look like I could throw them," Wyllis said, testing the swing. "It is a kind of sorcery masons know. We do not need the threats we wear on our shoulders. You have other sorceries." He brushed a wood shaving from the step with the back of his hand. "They laugh because they are afraid of being made small by simple necessities. A pin is an unromantic thing to kneel to. Sansa worked the latch herself with a practical hand. I humored a bard last night. He wanted to sing of heroes. He forgot to sing about people who kept the doors from sticking. Someone has to keep the world from being only about heroes, Wylis said. Bran did not laugh when Wylis said such things. He listened as if every word were a rung on a ladder he would climb later. He had begun to sleep with his back against the heart tree some nights, and when he woke he carried smells with him. Wet earth, crushed leaf, something sharp like winter kept in a jar. Sometimes Wylis caught him looking at him as a man looks at a friend he has known in 2 different lives. Did you know? Bran said one dusk as wind hissed through the weirwood's crimson fingers. That in one of the roads I have walked with my head instead of my feet. You died in the dark and a door made a word of you? Wylis had suspected as much. He had felt it in a way that did not require explanation, the way a horse knows there's a low branch ahead and ducks without thinking. He pulled his cloak tighter and thought of old Nan, who would have framed such a moment with a saying. I have dreams like that, he said. They end in panic and begin with the relief of waking. The relief is not pride. It is simply relief to have breath in the throat. You do not want that word, Bran said gently. It is not that, Wylis said, because a man must be exact with a boy who sees more than most. I do not want the door to make the word of me. I want to make the word of the door. Hold belongs to the task, not to the man. If I must be remembered, let it be for what I kept open after, not only for what I kept closed once. Bran laid his palm on bark. The tree seemed to listen, and Wylis felt a strange gratitude, as if the heart of Winterfell had agreed to the terms of his living. Then we will remember you for stubbornness, Bran said, and for patience. Nan said patience is a kind of appetite, Wylis murmured. She put that in your mouth, Bran said, and smiled as though he were being given bread. Ravens brought the south to them as paper and string and blunt blood. Men who had never seen fire except in hearths read words about flames walking down streets, about bells that had been begged for and not answered, about a queen whose mercy had been a promise and then a kind of ash. Sansa's jaw went hard in profile as she read aloud in council. Arya listened with her head cocked, eyes narrowed, a sailor measuring wind. Jon went away to fight one war and came back carrying the bones of another in his face. Wylis collected the papers after and folded them into a neat stack because tools deserve dignity and so do the messages that cut you. He did not understand the ways of dragons any more than he understood why some men crave crowns the way a man might crave salt when thirsty. He understood what cities do when panic and flames get at their old timber. They spread the damage as if it were a contagion. It does not belong to us, Sansa said to her brother on a night when the hall was bare and the map was lit by 3 lamps that smelled of tallow. We won the war we had to win. The South is another plague. Bran, who saw time the way a windmill sees wind, said, we will be called. He turned to Wylis because Wylis had learned he was often turned to when the talk circled back to bodies and how to move them. Will you come south with me if they ask for me? Doors everywhere, Wylis said with a little sh. Rug as if admitting to a bad habit. I cannot help myself. Arya, restless, leaned on her elbows and grinned. There's a boy with a hammer who used to be a bastard and now has a title bigger than his coat. He built a new door for the forge in the bleak of winter with no one telling him how. He'll like you. Men who can raise their own doors are a comfort, Wylis said, and the smile he earned from Arya was a flash from before she learned the cost of a name. The summons came on paper that had traveled through smoke. The edges were grayed and flaking. The words were as cold as counting. A gathering, a choosing, a reckoning for a dead queen and a living man who had removed her to keep something else from being removed. Wylis did not understand all that. He did not need to. He saw only that Bran must go and that Sansa would not send him without a guard who understood both his brother's body and his new, strange work. They left in a drizzle that smelled of thaw. Winterfell shrank behind them with the sad trick of all homes you love. It looks smaller the farther you go, as if apologizing for not being able to come along. The marsh met them where the land forgets its bones and turns to nerves. At Moat Cailin, the stones were slick with generations of regret. Wylus disliked the place on sight. It had the feel of old stubbornness that never learned when to give. He preferred wood. Wood bends before it breaks and grows back when it does. They crossed by causeway because there was no other way, and in the neck the reeds whispered around their ankles as if they were passing an audience that did not applaud and did not boo, simply marked your presence and added you to their patient account. Howland Reed found them before they found him, which Wylus decided was likely the way it always happened. He came out of the mist with a small retinue that did not look like a retinue because most of it moved on 4 legs or none. His hair had grown fey. His eyes had the habitual attention of someone who listens for the move beneath the move. He greeted Bran with a bow that was half family and half treaty with the unknown. "You've grown," he said, as if this were a human story he could keep up with. And then he looked at Wylus as men sometimes do when confronted with a size that upsets their arithmetic. "And you are the one who understands weight the way some men understand law." "I am Wylus," he said, "though men will call me something else when they are trying to make a story out of one day in my life." Howland smiled in a quick, private way. "They will do that to all of us," he said, and put his hand on Wylus's forearm as if he were testing the grain of a door. "I am glad you are with him. Mind the high places if you can." "There are always high places," Wylus said, "because honesty is a tribute to fellowship." They slept that night in a reed house that reminded Wylus of birds' nests multiplied until they were big enough to respect. Mira did not come out to the fire. He knew she had returned to her marsh long ago, and that her absence was not a wound so much as a scar that the weather occasionally woke. Jojen sat for a time with Bran on the edge of the platform and threw a handful of crushed leaf into the water as if paying a tax he did not resent. "What did you see?" Wylus asked finally, because he had learned that sometimes simple questions invite the least lies. "Men choosing," Jojen said, and his voice was not old but sounded like it owed something to age. "It is like watching boys choose teams for a game you've taught them they cannot afford to lose." "Boys are not always so cruel as men," Wylus said, and Jojen laughed once, tidy and sad. Riverrun's river ran. The Tully banners stirred like fish fins in a current of air that brought news before men could write it down. Edmure Tully greeted them with earnestness and a tendency to begin a speech in the middle and then go back for the start later. Wylus liked him because he tried and because he had learned to be humbled without losing the will to be useful. There were too many men who had learned only to be humbled. Wylus adjusted Bran's chair in the great hall before Sansa would have asked, testing the swivel, assuring himself that a man could turn easily to face whomever he needed to face. Respect sometimes looks like comfort. South of the Trident the land widened as if in relief. Farms scratched the world with small patience. People stared at Bran and then at Wylus's height and then at the wolves and then did not come nearer. They had seen enough strangers to know that not all strangeness demands conversation. The ruins of posts where ravens had once rested pricked the horizon like missing teeth. When at last they came within smell distance of the city, Wylus's face tightened. Ash has a texture to it in the air. It is not only smell. It is the way something gets in your nose and teaches you about absence without your consent. King's Landing wore its wounds like a dress that had not been finished. Streets had been cleared where they must be and left messy where men had decided they could live with mess. The Red Keep looked like a promise that had been broken on purpose. Wylus saw men carrying before he saw men arguing, and he counted that a hopeful sign. He counted too many children and the way some of them watched flames with too much attention, apprenticeship by disaster. He kept Bran's chair rolling, a steady pace, and when people stared at the boy with awe or anger or hungry hope, Wylus stared back until they looked away. Sometimes protecting a man is a matter of quiet pressure. They took them to the dragon pit because there was nowhere else left to be large enough for their work. Wylus had never seen it and wondered at the way a place built for beasts keeps the memory of them in its stones. He ran a palm along a cracked wall and felt old heat and new breaks. He saw faces arrange themselves like decks of cards. He did not know all the game being played, but he knew who had shuffled often and who had won by being lucky. Grey Worm's gaze moved like a blade measuring its own edge. Tyrion Lannister walked as if his feet needed reminding where the ground lay. Davos stood like a man who had convinced himself that steady was a sort of prayer. Sansa found her place, Arya hers at her back, not behind but apart, a twin shadow with a different logic. The boy Arya had named, Gendry of the Forge, stood with a puzzled pride, as if he had mislaid something crucial and could not believe he had found rank in its place. Wylis did what he always did when mouths said about violence without hands to back them. He watched the door. He learned how the hinges had been set after the last collapse, which wedges had been replaced in a hurry, what sort of touch the gate preferred. The world often tells you what it wants if you put your body near it with respect. He set his shoulder beside Bran's chair. He did not speak until he must. Words were thrown and fetched, returned with new words in their jaws. Men found ways to hide fear in talk of honor. Women did it better, but even they were tired of artifice. Edmure tried on leadership like a tunic borrowed from a taller cousin. He bore the laughter with dignity and sat down, grateful to have had the trying out. Sam tried to teach a gathering of lords how to imagine themselves equal. Wylis's admiration for that audacity was plain on his face. Tyrion wove a net of phrases that had caught men before. He threw it and they let themselves be caught because there are times when surrender is the most mature form of victory available. Bran was chosen, and the city did not shudder because the city had learned that shuddering does not change the weather. Sansa made the North an answer instead of a question. Wylis felt pride not unlike the pride a man feels when a horse he has trained chooses to run where it ought without a tug on the reins. After, when the air had learned to breathe again and the lords had gone to brag or sulk, Wylis wheeled Bran along a corridor missing a piece of its roof. Light slanted in like the hand of a god. They met Tyrion there by accident or design. With clever men it is often impossible to tell. He bowed more to Wylis than necessity required. I have always respected people who solved problems that killed fewer men than mine did, Tyrion said by way of greeting. You have that look about you, the look of someone who would rather be adjusting a hinge than a throne. Hinges hold thrones up, Wylis said, and the dwarf made a pleased little sound like a man enjoying a plum and the surprise of sweetness. Will you stay? Tyrion asked Bran. We could use a mind that is not merely a heart distracted by its own beating. Bran smiled, a small curve that contained both humor and generosity. For a time. He glanced at Wylis then, as if to say he would not know how long without him. Grey Worm did not ask any of them anything, but he let them do what they came to do, and that was its own concession. Wylis liked him in a way that did not require affection. You could share a world with men you did not want to drink with. He carried Bran into rooms where air still remembered smoke and into others where servants had already scoured sorrow from the corners. He showed the new king where thresholds had warped in heat, where the stone had flaked in such a way that a chair might catch. He spoke in his practical voice, never raising it, and watched men let go of a shallow breath they had not known they were holding. Tyrion walked with them more than was his duty. Sometimes Davos came too and told Wylis a sailor's trick for how to judge rot in rope by edge soundness, which Wylis received like a man tucking away a coin he might need later. Jon was held in a cell that had been converted from a pantry. It smelled of peppercorns and past feasts. Wylis went once with Bran because love sometimes asks you to do things that are none of your business. Jon's hair had grown untidy in the days of arguing. His eyes did not look lost so much as found again in a place he had not meant to be. He stood when they rolled Bran in, as if that could fix anything. Wylis looked at him and saw a boy he had supported awkwardly on a horse in Winterfell's yard, and a man wrapped in consequences, and a friend who had killed for a reason that would never improve for being explained. "You'll go north," Wylis said softly afterward when they were in the corridor again and Bran's hand lay quiet on the arm of his chair. "And you'll be all right because there is a kind of poverty that's rich, and the wall knows it." Bran nodded once. "He will take breath there, and it will not feel like pardon, and that is better. Pardon can be an insult to the life that led up to it. Breath is just breath. It lets a man begin again if he wants." They did a season's worth of work in a handful of weeks. New wedges were cut, new braces set. A carpenter's guild took shape around a woman who had learned the names of her children's miracles from watching them survive a fire. Tyrion insisted that Wylis meet the man who would draft the plan for houses rebuilt where shacks had gone down. Wylis found himself talking in a room where men drew straight lines and pretended they were the same as right ones. He did not let them forget that people's lives had curves in them, that you must leave room in a plan for the way a mother puts a stool by a window to fold clothes and watch a street and correct a day's tilt with a word tossed to a child too close to a cart. He drew a little sketch of a door's swing and how to feed a crowd through it without trampling children. Men looked at him and felt suddenly that they had been learning the wrong geometry and loved him for the new one because it made sense and did not require them to be different men, only better ones. When the first rains of a summer no one had expected came, Bran said it was time. Sansa had sent word with can do. And stubbornness braided together. The North had work, and work grows lonely if you do not go do it. The city had begun to talk about hope the way a convalescent talks about bread, shyly, with salivation. Wylis was glad to leave a place where people wanted to make statues too quickly. He had learned to prefer benches. They rode north along roads that had learned the tenderness of repair. Wylis listened to wheels and hooves. He had become a man whose ear held dozens of small notes. On the King's Road, a band of men watched them from a ditch, as if they were trying to remember whether they were still brigands or had become farmers again by force of snowfall. Wylis stared back until they looked like farmers and not a moment before. It is useful to insist with your eyes. At Winterfell, the apple trees had made a promise of themselves. Children laughed in a way that made you believe the human animal's memory of hunger might one day fade. Sansa stood with her back straight and her face ready to receive either good news or tolerable disappointment and did not flinch in either case. That is how you know someone has learned to govern. She embraced Bran without ceremony, and the hug was the arithmetic of siblings subtracted too long and suddenly added back. Wylis stood aside and let the world be good without his help for a full minute, which was hard. "Tell me everything," Sansa said, making a little joke of an impossible request as she put Bran's chair in motion. Wylis saw how carefully her hands went to the wheels, how quickly she had learned to carry her brother without lifting a thing. "No. Tell me only what I need to know and what will make me smile." "The city will not burn again soon," Bran said. "And Tyrion has promised to write you reports too long to read all at once." "Good," Sansa said. "I like to measure men by how much they say too much when they are proud and how little they say when they are ashamed." Arya stayed only a little while because the sea kept whispering to her through any open door, and Winterfell had many open doors now. Wylis helped her pack mostly by pretending to be in her way until she laughed and pushed at his shoulder and then allowed him to hand her the last bundle, which meant goodbye without saying it. She kissed Bran's brow and said to Sansa, "If you ever need something done that looks impossible from land, send a bird that remembers me. I'll find the rest." "You always do," Sansa said, with the sort of faith that is not flattery. Jon came north as if he had followed the scent of pine with his whole body. The watch took him back the way a workman takes a tool forgotten and remembered just in time. There was gratitude in it, and the gruffness found in gratitude when men are too proud to say thank you. Wylis met him at the yard gate with both hands and a gift wrapped in old sailcloth, a wedge he had whittled from heartwood, polished with oil until it gleamed, the head carved into a direwolf that looked too humorless to have come honestly from his fingers. "For the last door you cross before you go to bed," Wylis said. "Don't let it stick. You've had enough of being startled at night." Jon turned it in his hands, thumb rubbing the wolf's ear. "I never gave you a gift that mattered," he said, and Wylis shrugged his big shoulders as if to dislodge embarrassment. Jon smiled, then the smallest smile. "I suppose that wasn't my work." "Your work is to take breath," Wylis said, "and to teach boys not to pretend they are not afraid. The rest will keep." He did not go to the wall to watch Jon go through its gate. He had learned the lesson of proper distances. He taught 3 new boys how to set the bar at the hunter's postern so it would not rattle in the wind and make old men imagine ghosts where there were none. He fixed a pulley above the kitchen well. He took a day and built a little ramp to the library so Bran's chair did not have to jar itself up a lip every time he wanted to be filled with old men's thoughts. He asked the steward for a coil of rope and did not explain why. You do not explain all your preparations. They become weaker when you say them out loud. It was leaf fall when the saboteur tried. The year had taken on the look of a careful apology. Men slept with both boots near their beds instead of one. That is often when a man breaks something. Not when he is hungry and frost-taught, but when the softness begins to return. Wylus had noticed a missing wedge 2 mornings running by the postern in the east wall. The one servants used to slip out for quick trysts and smokers. The one he scolded lads away from and then used himself to get to the orchard faster. The second morning he said too casual as he wiped the pin. "If I were a man who wanted to make mischief, I would do it there, where the lovers already keep watch for those who would scold them." "Then you should be at that door," Sansa said later in council, quiet as gossip. "And someone else should watch the ones your enemies expect you to watch. If a man wants to trick a woman who has learned to be tricked, he must be clever." That night the sky had the hard, clean look that means frost will come whether you dress for it or not. Wylus put a boy in his bed for show. Rafe the dog boy, who could snore loud enough to be mistaken for 3. Wylus went to the postern and became part of the wall near it. Large men can do that when they learn to be still. He had a rope around his waist, and the other end ran through a pulley he had hung and into the hands of the wedge boy he trusted most, who crouched above, chills making questions in his teeth. They waited until it timed itself like a clock. The man came just before dawn, when those who went out at night are too tired to be careful and those who wake early have not yet added the world to their mornings. He wore an honest kitchen's cloak and honest boots and dishonest hands. He had a little knife for trimming, the kind that does more damage than its size suggests. Wylus watched him lift the bar inch by inch and did not stop him, because you must sometimes let a man begin a thing to prove you apprehend its shape. Just when the gate had space to admit a wolf, Wylus slid the rope off the peg, and his weight made a clean sense of gravity. The bar dropped as if it had remembered its duty with sudden shame. The man yelped as the timber pinned his fingers. Wylus stepped out of the wall and into the little breath of the man's panic and said, "Be quiet," with such an authority about it that the man obeyed, because breath obeys when someone says something in the right voice. Mira would have laughed at the trick with the rope and called it frog sense. Leaf would have approved without compliment. They put the man in a very small room and gave him water and the chance to tell the truth. Osha came to look at him because Osha had kept Rickon alive with ferocity and cunning and had a nose for men who preferred a knife to a vow. She snarled softly when she saw the tattoos at his wrist, the crude flayed man badly copied from better art. He was of the Dreadfort in the way a beaten dog still obeys the hand that taught it pain. He had come for something stupid and effective, to open and let in others who liked to uglify. Wylus felt something low and cold under his ribs when he heard that. You can spend years setting a hinge and one man can throw it all off with a breath and a bad decision. Sansa did not rage. She said a fair sentence and did not let it be cruel. Men whispered that their queen was hard now. Wylus thought hardness was the wrong word. She was exact. After that, he made his brigade practice with real panic. He brought them to the kitchens in a busy hour and cried, "Fire!" in a voice that would have made his old mother threaten to tan him for incitement. They ran as fools run, and then they ran as taught men run, which is to say they ran straight and did not shout and saw children first. The bakers threw wet cloth instead of buckets where water would have made oil proud. A boy put his hand in the wrong place and learned to put it in the right one and cried only when the salve hit and the scolding ended. "You like to drill," Arya said once, a ghost of a visit blowing in with her and out again 3 days later, the sea already tying her hair into knots behind her eyes. "I like to watch the surprise on a disaster's face when it learns we were already ready," Wylus said. "My father said once you cannot prevent a storm, but you can introduce it to a barn that has made friends with its roof." "Old Nan taught you that," Arya said. "She taught my father, and he taught me," Wylus said, which was as close to a genealogy as he would ever keep. "He built other things. He set the carpenters to fashioning counterweights so that one woman could lift what had once taken 3 men, and he did it making it look like an obvious idea anyone would have had. Useful pride is contagious." He drew chalk maps of the keep's movement on the floor of an empty granary and made boys and girls walk them until they could have done it blindfolded, which meant they would not need to when the night came to test them. He made a long ramp to the Godswood for Bran that curved gently so it could be navigated in frost. Men argued about the expense and he let them until they ran out of argument, at which point he said, "The expense is breath and back. We pay now or we pay when someone falls." That ended it. There were quiet days too, which felt like God sent. Wylus sat with his back to the kitchen wall and watched the world go by, and because he is a man people forget can be quiet, he learned odd truths. He learned which vendors cheated by pressing the scales with fingers and which saved their kindness for lads who had no coin. He learned the cadence of the old woman who sold onions in a basket and swore she'd been a beauty before the winter of the 7 winds. He believed both parts of her claim. He learned to laugh in his chest where it was less likely to frighten timid creatures. Bran wrote to him from the south sometimes, long letters full of facts and very small jokes written like afterthoughts. He told Wylus about a plan to plant trees along roads to make shade for pilgrims and oats for horses, about a man tried for stealing who was offered a choice between the usual sentence and a summer's work on drains and chose drains and learned something about dignity, about a meeting with a woman from Dorne who wore earrings like small suns and wanted to teach the city what oregano could do for a stew. He did not tell Wylus about dragons because there were none left. Wylus wrote back rarely, and when he did his letters were a list of door noises and the names of boys who had learned to trust their hands. Bran said those were better reports than war. On a day that felt like every other and therefore was holy, Wylus went to the stables to mend a bridle. The mare turned her great head and breathed carrots into his hair, which made him laugh out loud, which made the stable girl jump. She was from White Harbor and carried her vowels in a polite basket. "I'm to go home for a month," she announced in the brave voice of someone who is not sure she deserves it. "My sister is to be wed. You will dance?" Wylus said as if reading a law, and she laughed so easily it felt like proof of weather changing for the better. That night he dreamed again of the other story where he could not speak, and he woke with the sorrow you feel for a man you might have been. He put his feet on the cold floor and waited until the panic retreated without shame, because he had learned it will if you let it. He dressed and went to the yard. The moon had brought the yard into an old kind of blue. He put his palm against the big door of the great hall and felt the answer come up through the wood. It was not only a door. It was all the doors and the way they tell one another news. He whispered because the dark enjoys SECR. ETS shared with grace, "Thank you for holding." And in that moment it did not seem foolish to believe something old and unarticulated whispered back, "Thank you for learning." Spring deepened in increments that felt generous. Grain came up shyly and then with confidence. Wolves slept more and killed less. Men learned to look forward without flinching. Sansa held her court with a firmness that had learned how to sit without clenching its jaw. The reeds sent smoked fish and shy letters. The Manderleys sent oats and fat jokes and ships bristling with sensible pride. The Umbers sent a cartload of logs cut clean, and Wylus went through them like a man choosing friends. Thumping, listening, nodding at those who gave a hollow he knew how to fill. Leaf left one night in the company of Fog. She came to Wylus by the Godswood and looked at his hands as if counting scars and said, "The green does not need me here." With the absolute certainty of trees, Wylus did not hold her back because holding back is not always the work. He gave her a bundle of wedges wrapped in oilcloth. "Some doors are only certain if you remind them regularly," he said, and Leaf smiled in such a way that you felt something old in you had been given permission to keep breathing. Jojen went with her some days later, compass point steady in his chest. He put his hands on Wylus's forearms and said, "You taught me how to put my weight in the right place," which is one of the kinder things a man can be told. Mira did not come to say goodbye, and yet Wylus felt her presence near as if reeds had found their way into the outer yard and were whispering in their own language, and he counted that a blessing too. They made a new feast day in Winterfell not for a battle but for mending. The cook set tables in the yard and the children danced clumsy reels, and there were awards given for small things: most patient with pins, best wedge, least frightened when it mattered. Wylus tried to hide himself behind a barrel. They dragged him out and put a wreath on his head that made him sneeze. Sansa raised a cup and said, "To the man who taught us to love what keeps us alive even when it is not glorious." And Wylus tried to look as if he had not heard, because sometimes it is better to let the people enjoy the sound of their own gratitude. In time, a letter came from the south with a seal that said two things: power and the cousin of power, which is responsibility. Bran's hand was in the shape of a message written quickly and picked up again hours later and made to look like one thought. "We have found," he wrote, "that the city has a door that is not a door. It is a custom. People who wish to ask anything of their ruler wait on the steps of the Red Keep and hope for passage through a smaller arch no one takes notice of until it is needed. The arch sticks. They stand in the sun and grow angry, and anger makes bad petitions into worse ones. Come teach them a way to pass. Then come home again. Wylus read it twice and saw the problem whole. An architecture of habits had made a hinge where there should have been an open threshold. He went without drama, with 2 wagons, a boy who could carry banter and bolts with equal ease, a woman from the carpenters who had invented a locking pin that could be reset with a tap, and a tailor's daughter who took measurements as if she were drawing souls. They made the arch honest in 3 days and then spent 2 weeks teaching guards how to admit people in an order that left dignity intact. It worked because they did not call it policy. They called it a line. It worked because Wylus stood there the first day with his great body and showed people how to be orderly without feeling pushed. And because Tyrion watched with the appreciation of a man who sees a mess solved by someone else and understands the delicate gift of that. He did come home again, and faster because men learn fastest what they will someday need again. He found Winterfell even more itself, which is all you can ask of a place after trouble. He put his hands to work and his mind where his hands were. On a night in early winter when the stars showed off and a new boy at the postern mistook the howl of a fox for a warning of men and raised an alarm and was not punished for it because alarms are how boys become men, Wylus sat down beside the door and put his head back and let his breath come slow. His knees ached the way joints do when weather is busy. He put both palms to the wood, as he had taken to doing, and thought of the river and the banks and of the boy who had told him the truth of it. "Do you ever think?" he asked the grain. "Because sometimes you must give your questions to something that will outlast you. What would have become of me if a word had taken my mouth?" He did not expect an answer. He felt instead a stillness that acknowledged his wondering. It was enough. Bran came then, rolling softly. He did not speak until his chair was beside Wylus's knee. He looked at the door too, and for a long minute they watched it together, men of different shapes married to the same work. "In another road," Bran said, so quiet the door itself had to listen. "You died so I could live. Do you want me to show you?" Wylus thought of pride and its tricks. He thought of the way a man sometimes goes searching for ghosts and comes back with a mouth full of dirt. He thought of breath. "No," he said, "you have already made that death count. I have this life to make count. If there is a day when I forget to make it count, you may show me and I will learn humility. For now, I am well instructed." Bran turned his head and looked at him the way a boy looks at a father and a man looks at an old friend. "You are stubborn," he said with affection. "I am patient," Wylus said, and then laughed softly. "And hungry. Come, there is bread." They went in. The door moved at his push, simple as water talking itself into a streambed. For the first time since he had learned his size frightened people, Wylus did not try to make himself smaller. He filled the doorway and stepped through. Men and women followed, and the hall took them in with lamplight and soup smell and the low, good murmur you hear when a house remembers how to be a home. He found a bench. He found friends. He found work waiting for morning. He ate, he listened, he allowed his mind to be quiet enough to be taught by weariness. When he rose later and banked the fire and set the last bar across the kitchen door, he said into the ordinary dark, "Hold," with the satisfaction of a craftsman putting his name on a piece no one would ever know he had made. Then he went to his bed, lay down with the weight of a day upon him, and slept the sleep that honest labor marries every night without a priest.